Okay, so we'll just run through it quickly. And if you have any questions, stop and let me know. Number one, 4 goals of psychology were to what? Are to do what?
Describe, explain, predict, change.
Good. Letter C. Number 2, which is the most accurate definition of the discipline of psychology? By which I mean, which one did I tell you you had to know? C, right? The scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Number 3, 1879 in Germany. Who oversaw the first psychological laboratory? C, right? Wilhelm Wundt. And number 4, if you are in early psychology and you're describing your conscious experience, what kind of method are you probably using? B, introspection, right? Good. Okay. Any questions on the first page then? All right, number 5. This one more people have trouble with. Structuralists were important in the history of psychology because why? A, right? They examined our consciousness using introspection and the structure of our mental processes. Any questions on that one? Okay. Number 6, if you think that why we think and feel what we do is more important than what we think and feel, what are we most likely a proponent of? B, functionalism, right? Okay. And number 7, who believes that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? A, Gestaltists, right? That's their big thing. Number 8, what did Freud think was the key to understanding the nervous disorders he observed? C, the unconscious, right? Freud thinks everything, the unconscious is the key to just about everything. All right? And number 9, behaviorism attempts to explain behavior by studying what? Right, C. Now, the other answers there all imply that the behaviorists care why we do things, but they don't, right? They don't care about the purpose or the reason. Okay, so that's why the other questions aren't necessarily correct. Number 10, what does Pavlov's research demonstrate? A. Any questions on that one? That was troublesome. Okay.
I wasn't sure if it was a typo because of it being an unconditioned or neutral stimulus, or an unconditioned response. I can't remember which one right now.
Oh, okay. Could occur in response to an unconditioned or
Yeah.
neutral response instead of a conditioned or neutral response. Well, it could be, but it could also be that an unconditioned response, the salivation, could occur in response to an unconditioned stimulus or a neutral stimulus, which would be the sound of the bell, I guess. So yeah, I can see where that could be confusing. Could any of the other ones have been correct though?
Not really.
Not really? Okay. All right, how many people got that one wrong? Not too many. All right. Well, it was just a point then. Yeah, but let me fix that for next semester anyway. Okay, number 11, then. Freud developed a form of therapy known as what? C, psychoanalysis or the psychoanalytic school, right? Number 12, which of the following fields is considered a parent of the discipline of scientific psychology? C, philosophy, right? Philosophy was the early school, and then we have the science of psychology now, right? And if you guys were very observant, you could see that I forgot to unbold C, so that was a little bit of a giveaway. But surprisingly, I got a couple answers. Did anyone pick chemistry? I don't know if it was this section or other ones, which I thought was an interesting choice. But no, it was C, philosophy. Okay. What are the two types of conditioning we learned?
B.
Right, classical and operant, right? Number 14, Paul gets bitten by a spider as a child, and then he gets a phobia, and then he goes for therapy, and he has all these exposures to spiders that aren't unpleasant, right, that aren't scary, and he's cured of his phobia. What is that?
C.
C, operant conditioning.
Why wouldn't it be B then?
Why wouldn't it be which one?
The stimulus generalization.
Why would it be that?
Well, I'm saying, cause like, isn't that like a treatment, isn't that therapy? To like generalize from like a fear?
Stimulus generalization, you're thinking of desensitization, I think. Stimulus generalization is, did we talk about baby Albert a little bit? Okay.
How is that working?
It's like, so he was afraid of the white rat, but then he was also afraid of like a white rabbit. And that's like generalizing. So, I think you're thinking of desensitization. Okay. So it's operant conditioning. And what is the reinforcement? Because that's a little, I don't know, tricky here, but what is the reinforcement that gets Paul, that makes it operant conditioning? Why is it that it works for Paul?
It's like, I know it's is it the negative because it's taking away, or is it the positive because it's taking away?
Well,
Like the image of the spider.
right, and it's the reinforcement is that it's that non-threatening experience, right? So it's taking away the bite, right? Because it was the bite of him that scared him as a child. Okay, number 15. Who thinks that we're all born tabula rasa? Aristotle, right? Okay. If we were to think of this on that nature-nurture debate, which side of the debate is Aristotle on? Nurture, right? Because if we're all born blank slate, then we have to be a product of our environment, right? Okay. Number 16, psychoanalysis assumes what?
Oh, B.
Yeah, B, that the unconscious mind is the most powerful motivator of behavior, right? Freud and his unconscious. Okay, 17. Psychoanalysis assumes the unconscious blocking or repression of disturbing thoughts and impulses, especially blank, is at the heart of all maladaptive adult behavior. What does Freud think are the impulses that make us uncomfortable, that we push down, and that cause us to have psychological disorders?
D.
D, sexual and aggressive, right? Like those id impulses. Any questions on that one? That was one that a couple people got wrong.
I thought I would, but then it made sense and I just forgot to erase my stomach.
Okay, so we all in agreement on that one? All right. Number 18, when did psychology gain its independence from philosophy and become more, what?
C.
Scientific, right? So we start applying scientific method, scientific principles, and it sort of becomes now more psychology as a science instead of philosophy.
So
What's that?
behavioral observations couldn't be deemed scientific at all.
Well, they could be, but when we look at it in this context, scientific is definitely the broadest and most appropriate. So behavioral observations are science; they would fall under that category.
Okay.
So they would be more specific, I think, than the question. But they certainly are. 19, who is known for natural selection and evolution?
B.
B, Darwin, right? Number 20, Maria gets photographed and the flash goes off and she blinks. So now she starts blinking every time she's photographed, even if the flash doesn't go off. So the camera, the act of being photographed by that camera is what? Conditioned stimulus, right? Because the camera on its own, or just having your picture taken without the flash, should that evoke a blinking response? Or without,
No.
until the flash gets paired, right? It's not until we start using the flash that she starts blinking in response to that. So it's the learned, it's the conditioned stimulus. Okay, 21 to 25. You guys, I think, did pretty well. Not every section got this, but I feel like you guys did pretty well on this. Okay, so in the story of my everyday life here, what is the unconditioned stimulus? What does T-Rex do just because I open the door?
It goes outside.
I open the door and he goes outside, right? So that's the unconditioned part. So what's the neutral stimulus? What should mean nothing to him if it's not paired with something? Turning off the lights, right? Because in other situations or without him learning this, me turning off the lights shouldn't tell him, let me go to the front door, right? They're not related, so it's neutral. So then what is the conditioned stimulus? The lights, right? The neutral stimulus is the unconditioned stimulus plus the neutral stimulus. That gives you the conditioned stimulus. So it's usually the same, right, as the neutral. So 22 and 23 are the same answer. All right, 24. What was his unconditioned response, which we already said? Going outside. And then 25, what was his conditioned response?
Gets ready to go outside.
Right, he goes to the door, gets ready to go outside when I do what? Turn off the lights. Okay. All right. So you guys, for the most part, did pretty well, right? Any questions on the multiple choice part? These would be useful to look over when you're studying for your midterm as well. Yep. Oh, well, I must have missed it then. So I guess you got it right. All right, and for the essay, which was worth 10 points, I asked you to compare and contrast the operant conditioning factors of reinforcement versus punishment, types of each, and the potential effect on behavior. So, what were some of the points that you should have included, I guess? We have positive and negative reinforcement, right? And positive and negative punishment, and what they are, maybe some examples of each. Certainly the fact that reinforcement does what to the likelihood of behavior? Increases. And punishment decreases the likelihood. We talked about primary and secondary reinforcements, right? So maybe some examples of those. What was like a primary reinforcement? Yep. And then like secondary.
Taking something away that could, like a negative reinforcement.
That's negative reinforcement. But the secondary reinforcers are the ones that were like could be slightly less motivating. So like money instead of food, right? The ones that aren't like a biological drive. So you could have included that. And then you could have included that if you are trying to get a behavior, teach or learn, which is likely more effective, reinforcement or punishment? Reinforcement. And what are some of maybe the potential dangers of punishment?
Creating fear.
Right, fear, misbehavior, right, acting out, things like that. So there were some sort of downfalls that we could find behaviorally from punishment as well. Okay. Questions on that stuff? I would like to point out that Emma, right? Not to draw too much attention on people, but you're the only one in any of the sections that got 100. Many people did very well and got even 99s. But since you're the only one that got 100, I would like to point that out and acknowledge. So, good job. And in general, you guys, this group did very well on these. So,
That's what I did.
I will show you. I didn't print it out, but I have it in my grade book.
Okay.
So I'll give it to you. Okay. All right. So, moving on. I gave you guys the notes on research methods and design. We're going to get into that a little bit today. So we know we talked about that psychology gets more scientific, right? That's what we were just saying, and as we sort of have gone forward. So we're going to talk today about what it is, or what some of the things are that make it scientific, and how we sort of can set up and run some of the experiments that we do. Did we talk about at all who the most commonly experimented on people are?
Student.
Yeah, college students, right? Because there's a lot of you guys, and a lot of experiments and research takes place at colleges, right? It's a good, academia is a great place for research and scientific research. Okay. So when we're talking about research and doing research, what does it mean? What are we actually doing? What is research, or what is it to research?
Testing hypotheses.
Testing hypotheses, absolutely, right? What else is it?
Surveys and polls.
Yep, surveys, polls, and that's ways that we can gather a lot of research, right? And what are we looking for, Chase, when we're doing these answers, right? We're looking for answers. The same way we might Google something, 20 times a day, what are we often looking for? Answers, right? And sometimes they're answers to like specific questions, like where's this restaurant, or what, what's the name of this, or whatever. But sometimes, I'm sure I'm not the only one who Googles stuff just for the heck of it. Like just because you're sort of curious about something, right? That's all research, right? Either specific research, or what we would call applied research to answer a specific question, or basic research, which is I'm just sort of curious about this, right? I saw something I didn't know, or heard something I didn't know, or I wanted to learn more about, and so you look it up. So you do your own research. All right, so that kind of research is what we would call basic research. And basic research is research that we do, or research that's conducted just for the sake of knowledge, just to advance our own understanding or knowledge of something. And that's the kind of research that they generally do, or we generally do at places like universities, colleges, or laboratories, right? Places where they are designed to sort of get information. When basic research is started, or sort of being embarked on, at the time it doesn't have known real world uses. So we're not using it to solve like a known problem. Not to say that it won't, right? If we find out information, we might say, oh, that's interesting, maybe this can help this or do that. But when we sort of embark on this research, it's just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So when we do this basic research, it's answering our first 3 goals of psychology. And what was the first goal of psychology again? To describe, so tell us the what of something, right? What's the second one? Explain, and what does that tell us?
Why?
The why. And then the third? Predict, and that tells us when, right? So basic research can tell us any of those things of psychology. The what, the why, and the when. Now, if we wanted to answer a specific problem, like I don't know, how to stop a certain bridge from flooding that always does. So we've got a specific problem that we need to address. We would do what we call applied research, okay? And that's the kind of research that we are doing to answer a specific question or to solve a specific problem in the real world. So that's the kind of research that is, because it's designed to solve real world problems, often conducted outside of the laboratory. All right, so if we wanted to stop this certain bridge from flooding, instead of making, although we might, making models of the bridge and pouring bottles of water on it and stuff and seeing what we can do, what would we more likely do? Where would we do our research? On the bridge itself, right? And the surrounding river or whatever it is, right? So this kind of applied research is gonna answer that fourth goal of psychology for us. And what's the fourth goal? To change or control, right? So, it's going to solve something, which means it's gonna change an outcome or control an outcome for some reason for us. Where else might you use applied research? Can anyone think of an example?
Maybe like in the workplace, like to try to get people to like work faster, like work harder.
Absolutely. Industrial psychology, or in general, is a very common area for something like that, for applied research, right? What can we do to get our workers to be more efficient, more productive?
About medical trials.
Sure, right? When you want to lower people's cholesterol, right? When we know that's a problem in the real world, what are we gonna do? We're gonna
People.
come up with drugs, that we think do that, and after many, many tests on other things, we'll test them on humans, right, to see if they work. So that's applied research. We are trying to change this problem of high cholesterol, so to speak, right?
I saw a movie, it was called The Experiment.
The experiment
Yeah, or Experiment.
or experimenter. There's two.
I don't know.
You guys can watch both of them.
It was the one with the,
Is it Milgram? Or they shock people
no, this is when they go into.
in the prison?
Prison.
We're gonna watch that. Did you see the American one or the German one with subtitles?
Something there.
Okay. That's something we can all look forward to. But we're gonna watch the German one, subtitles. It's much better, I think. That is The Experiment, and that is a very, very interesting one, and it's based on an American experiment, on the Zimbardo prison experiments, which we'll talk about, absolutely. If you guys wanna write these down, or this down, there is another movie called Experimenter, no the in front of it, just Experimenter, and it's got Winona Ryder in it, and I can't remember the male lead, but it's recently been on Netflix. It's about a gentleman named Stanley Milgram, and a research study, several of his research studies, but the one in particular that he's quite famous for. You can use that as an extra credit movie if you want. So the same deal that applied to, what did we say, to Split and the other, you can do Experimenter on Netflix.
Looks like it's one of those.
You can do,
Both.
I'll put a limit on it at some point, but probably up to 5 by the end of the semester. In theory, you could get 5 points. Yeah. I saw Split yesterday also, so I can't wait for you all to see it so we can talk about it.
How was it?
I liked it. I didn't try to look at it through like a professional lens. I tried to just enjoy it as a movie, and I could. And the little bit of real science that was in it, there was some that was correct, like they did say some things, and then there was some that was pretty out there. So,
So what
So
were
it's
the,
not it's not really believable. I mean, was it believable or?
no, and I don't think that I'm the only one that would think that. I think that even without knowing too much about multiple personalities and things like that, that the stuff that's not believable would be not believable to everybody. It's fairly, but it was good. And I had a little surprise at the very end that you guys, some of you might be too young to even appreciate, but you'll see. So, I can't say what it is, obviously,
I didn't watch it.
until you all see it.
so the experimenter in Split?
You can see Experimenter, you can see Split, you can see Cure for Wellness. And honestly, as I think psychology is important in all aspects and can be applied to all aspects of things, if you watch a movie and you think, oh, you know what, this relates to this topic that we talked about or that topic, go for it. Yes?
Is the Cure for Wellness stuff?
I don't know because I haven't seen it yet. It's new.
Is that the guy stuff? Yeah, it was on last night.
What's that?
I was watching it. My dad was watching it.
Oh, okay.
You kept flipping between basketball games tonight because it got like romantic.
I don't know if that's the same one.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
like
they-
the
I don't think
movie.
it's
Yeah,
really
it's
such
yeah.
a-
It's the movie.
Yeah, it's in the reviews.
Oh.
Okay, well, I'm talking about.
Okay. There's also another one called Compliance that somebody in my last class told me is free on Amazon Prime right now. I don't know if it's on Netflix or not, so you guys have to look around for that one. You can definitely do that one, and it's applicable to like Milgram and Experimenter and some of that other stuff that we're talking about right now. I'll think of other ones, and like I said, if you think of something, you know, just touch base with me before you go and write it up, but I would imagine that I would agree that it works. You know, people have done all sorts of different stuff.
Have you seen the movie Passengers yet?
Is it good?
Yeah, actually, it's pretty good. It's I did notice some things from a psychological point of view.
Yeah. If you, like I said, if you want to do it, go for it. I'm sure you guys can think of movies or books, or now that you're thinking about it, you'll see a movie or read a book and think like how applicable this could be. I know some of you guys are reading books for your English class. I'm sure there's things you can talk about in that from a psychological perspective if you wanted to. So why not combine some stuff? Okay, so that's just an aside on your extra credit there. So, moving forward, we do this different research and we are trying to keep this field scientific, right? So, in order to do so, we are going to follow the scientific method, and we all know what that is, right? When we follow the scientific method, we're following what we call standardized scientific procedures. What does that mean, to be a standardized procedure?
Something that everyone does.
Right, right. So, thinking of it from a little bit of a different perspective, if I gave you guys an assignment, and I said, I'd like you all to, on Friday, bring in cookies. There would be, how many different ways are there to make cookies?
You go buy cookies.
Many, many ways, right? So, you guys could all bring in cookies on Friday, and we'd be looking at, would any of them be exactly the same?
Probably.
Even if multiple people made like the traditional Nestle chocolate chip ones, right? You might make them slightly differently. Maybe some people weigh their flour and some people measure it in the cups, and it says to bake 9 to 11 minutes. Maybe some people go for the 9, maybe some people go for the 11, right? There's all different ways that we could do it. Our measurements are going to be slightly different because that's how it is, right? Even eggs are never going to be exactly the same size, right? Well, not never, but it's unlikely that we would have identical cookies. So there's probably 25 of us in here now, so we'd have probably 25 different kinds of cookies. But if I gave you a specific recipe with specific instructions on how I wanted everything measured, right? Say I want everyone to use the same brand of flour and the same brands of sugar, and I want you to weigh them this way, and I gave you very, very specific instructions, what would we have a lot more of? The same cookie, right? So that's what we're sort of looking for. We're looking to replicate results. So that's a standardized procedure, okay? So it's a very specific set of instructions to be able to have a consistent result. So that's why things like buying cookies, or even like fast food restaurants, right? They have the same instructions. That's why if you get like a Big Mac here or a Big Mac in California or one in London, they're like kind of all the same, right? Because they have standardized processed stuff that you have to have. Okay, so the whole point of following the scientific method is that when we run these experiments, when we do our designs, our findings, right, whatever we come up with, we have to be able to understand them, other people have to understand them, and they have to be able to repeat them in order to test them. Because one finding, me doing one experiment, does not make it valid, right? It has to be repeated over and over and over. So when we follow the scientific method, we want to think of it as something that's very cyclical. So instead of saying we start at the beginning, we go to the end, and that's it, it's you start at the beginning, you go through the process, you get to the end, and then where do you go again if it's cyclical?
Like growth art.
Yeah, back to the beginning, right? And it goes over and over and over. And when we run it on different experiments, the results are what we would call cumulative. So the more times the experiments run with the same or similar findings, the stronger or more valid it becomes. When we are starting something, starting to think about doing some research, what's the first thing, before even like the official step one of the scientific method, what's the first thing you have to do if you are going to do some sort of research project?
Come up with an issue.
Yeah, you have to think of what you want to research, right? So you need some sort of topic. Does anybody have a topic that they're interested in that we could use? Languages? Okay. So we are interested in studying foreign languages. That's a broad topic, but that's where we need to start, right? So if we want to do this scientifically, the first thing that we need to do, and that's step one, now our official step one of the scientific method, is going to be to do what?
Research.
That's for the variables.
What's that?
That's a question.
Did you say the first step of the scientific method?
Was what?
Did you say the first step of the scientific method?
Yes.
For like your hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
There's one step before the hypothesis.
Question.
Step
Can I make a question or something?
research?
Yeah, the research, the lit review, right? We know we want to study languages, foreign languages. So now we're going to read scientific journals and all that sort of stuff and read as much as we can. Other studies that have been done on the topic, right? Do some general big research because we need to know what it is that we want to focus on, right? So step two would be that focusing in and forming our hypothesis, right? So our hypothesis is that if then, right? If X, then Y. If this, then that. Something like that. What might a hypothesis be on this topic?
If you know a second language, you would be able to get jobs easier.
Okay, that's a good one, and certainly applicable for you guys, right? So, people who are bilingual have a higher success rate, and we'll have to define it. What higher would be, are 20% more likely to find a job out of college. Now, why did I specified bilingual, 20% higher rate, and job out of college, right? I made it a specific statement. Why did I have to do that?
It's measurable.
Right, it's measurable, and so that when I'm done with my study and somebody else goes to run a study, maybe they're looking, we need to make sure that they know we're not looking at people that speak 4 languages, and we're not saying that they are 5% more likely, or, you know, it has to be measurable, it has to be what we call reliable, which means that somebody else can do it and somebody else can do it, right? Our definitions have to be consistent and measurable, reliable and measurable. Okay, so that's how we're gonna start defining our variables, right? So what are the variables?
Yes.
Independent, dependent. Or like, specifically.
Yeah, specifically in this.
The dependent would be it would be the people for the dependent, because you're like controlling them, the thing.
Dependent would be, dependent on what? In this? What's that? So it depends on, what depends on what in this hypothesis?
Person depends on the employer.
The language.
The chance of being hired depends on
Being bilingual or not?
being bilingual or not, right? Okay. So those are our variables. We've defined them by saying bilingual, what chance you have of being hired, all that sort of stuff, right? Okay, so that was step 2. So now, step 3 is that we have to do what? Anybody know? We know what we want to study. We know specifically what we're looking to answer. So now what do we have to do?
Testing.
Test it, right? We have to run our experiment, run our research design. In order to do that, we have to choose what's the best kind of research to use for this study. We are going to, as soon as we get through this scientific method, talk about different kinds of research and what might be applicable for what. But the bottom line is we can't use, there's many different kinds of research, right? And not everyone is appropriate for every kind of study. There's a kind of research called naturalistic observation, which we'll talk about, which has to do with observing people or animals or whatever in their natural environments. So if I'm interested, however, in an operant conditioning study that has to do with how quickly we can get a rat to run a maze, can I use naturalistic observation to do that?
Yeah.
Are rats naturally in their own environments running mazes for cheese and stuff, right? That's gonna have to be in a laboratory setting, right? In the same way that, doing drug research, like does, this pharmaceutical, this cholesterol lowering drug, does it work or not? That doesn't, a case study, which is an in-depth study of one person, is that a good use for that? No, testing this drug on one person doesn't give us a great idea, how effective it might be as a cholesterol lowering drug. Maybe it works on that person, maybe it doesn't, but there's way too many other factors to consider. We need a much bigger sample size. So that's what we're doing here. We're choosing the correct thing, and then we are running our experiment, right? Okay, so we have the best research design, we run the experiment, we get all this data, a whole bunch of numbers. What do we have to do then? What's the next step?
Support or reject the hypothesis.
Yeah, based on
The analysis.
the analysis, right? So we've got all these numbers. Now what are we gonna do with them? What do they mean? Did we find an answer, right? Did we find that bilingual individuals were actually 20% more likely to get a job? So we're gonna do some math, right? We gotta analyze this data. And there's some simple things that we can do with large groups of data. So I gave you guys a quiz, right? And then I graded the quizzes, and so your grades on the quizzes are my data. What was I collecting? What was I testing you guys for?
Our knowledge.
Yeah, your knowledge of
Subject
the
knowledge.
subject matter, right? Okay, so now I have a list of 30, well, many grades. And what different things might I do with that information to sort of help me see where I'm at in terms of
Change your lesson plan? Yeah, you change, you like, see how-
based on what?
Like the average.
An average would be a good example, right? So say I've got scores that go from, 50 to 100. So that's a big range, but I see that my average, or your average, was a 90. Okay, so that's like not too bad, right? How do I get to that number? I know this is very simple math, but what do I do? And what's the word for that starts with an M? The mean, right? So that's a simple statistical analysis I can do of my data. what's there? So there's those three words that start with M, right? What's another one? Median. And what's the median? How do I get that? That's the other one. How do I get to the median?
It's the middle number,
The middle number when I do what?
when you look at all your like data.
Numerical order.
In numerical order, right? And it's the middle number. And then mode. And what's the mode?
The one with the most numbers.
The one with the most numbers, right? The one that comes up the most.
And you go back to math class.
Yeah, right? That's all you have to, well, we'll have other math later on, but. Now what else might I do? Do you guys know what it, like a standard deviation and that sort of stuff is, right? So that's other numbers I might run on some data to find out. And what I'm looking to find out is if my results are what we would call statistically significant, right? So, did that like blow your mind?
No, it's what we learned last semester.
Oh, okay, good. So if I find that, let's see, what would I find?
If it's like really low, it would be like something's going on.
Something went wrong, or just I was wrong, right? My hypothesis did not prove to be true. So that could be the case, or something went wrong in the experiment, right? Or there's certainly other factors and confounding variables, right, that can get into play there. But if my numbers look good, if it's a high number, what do I think then? What would I do?
Then you know you're not, so this is right. If it's-
Well, I don't know it's right, but
Well, it's like there's enough evidence.
there's good evidence to support it, right? So then I would want to go ahead and try to get it published, right? So I'm gonna submit my results to, am I gonna submit them to like People or Time magazines? Who am I gonna submit them to?
Probably like your college.
Yeah, like a real scientific journal. And then all my other colleagues and people in my field are gonna read them, and what are they gonna do after they read my stuff?
Test it.
Yeah, like suggest whether it's like
Right, go up with analysis.
Yep, all those things. They're gonna do all those things, and they're gonna criticize it, right? They're probably gonna tear it apart. But if after testing it and critiquing it and reviewing it, they find that they think maybe the data is good, right, and it works, then what do I need people to do? What are people gonna do in order to add validity to this?
some people, or some of them are gonna do it like over.
Yeah, right, so we're gonna do more and more of these studies, and again, we said that they are cumulative, so that the more we do, the more valid they become, right? So we get to develop a theory, which is sort of an educated statement on, we think that being bilingual does increase your chance of being hired out of college. And then that's gonna go right back to the beginning, right? And our study is gonna become part of that lit review that other people do and other studies, and they're gonna run it all over again. Right? Okay. All right, so on Friday, we'll get into some of the different research designs, the different kinds of research that we could run. Are there any questions for today? No? Okay, then have a good afternoon, and I will see you on Friday.